The salvage yard stretched endlessly under the twin suns of Kepler. 442b, a graveyard of broken dreams and failed ambitions. Mountains of twisted metal reached toward the orange sky, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Among the debris lay the remnants of 1,000 different civilizations, each piece telling a story of conquest, defeat, or simple obsolescence. Captain Sarah Chun picked her way carefully through the maze of discarded technology, her environmental suit's sensors constantly scanning for anything of value. The Galactic Salvage Corporation paid well for rare materials, and she needed the credits badly. Her ship, the Meridian's Hope, was 3 payments behind on its docking fees, and the creditors were getting impatient. "Just another day in paradise," she muttered, stepping over a pile of crystalline fragments that had once been part of a Zalarian meditation chamber. The irony wasn't lost on her that she, a former military engineer, was reduced to picking through garbage for a living. But the war had ended badly for humanity, and opportunities for their kind were scarce in the galactic community. Sarah paused as her scanner detected something unusual. Buried beneath a collapsed section of what appeared to be a Thraxian battlecruiser was an energy signature unlike anything in her database. The readings were faint but persistent, suggesting something was still powered after who knew how many years in this mechanical cemetery. She began clearing away the debris, her suit's servos whining under the strain of moving the heavy metal plates. Most salvagers would have moved on by now, looking for easier pickings, but Sarah's engineering background had taught her patience. Sometimes the best discoveries required a little extra effort. After 2 hours of careful excavation, she uncovered what looked like the bridge section of a starship. But this wasn't like any design she'd ever seen. The hull was composed of an iridescent metal that seemed to shift colors in the light, and the overall structure appeared almost organic, as if it had been grown rather than built. Strange symbols covered every surface, pulsing with a faint blue glow that indicated active systems. "Well, I'll be damned," Sarah whispered, running her gloved hand along the smooth surface. Her scanner was going crazy now, detecting power levels that should have been impossible in a derelict vessel. Whatever civilization had built this ship, they were far more advanced than anything currently known to the galaxy. She found what appeared to be an airlock, its outline barely visible in the seamless hull. As she approached, the symbols around the entrance began to glow brighter, and with a soft hiss, the airlock cycled open. Sarah hesitated for a moment, every safety protocol she'd ever learned screaming at her to back away. But curiosity won out over caution, as it always did. The interior of the ship was even more remarkable than the exterior. Bioluminescent panels provided soft illumination throughout the corridors, and the walls seemed to pulse with a gentle rhythm, like a heartbeat. The air was breathable, according to her suit's sensors, maintained at perfect temperature and humidity by systems that had been running for untold millennia. As she explored deeper into the vessel, Sarah began to realize this wasn't just advanced technology. It was something beyond her comprehension. The ship appeared to be alive, responding to her presence with subtle changes in lighting and sound. Doorways opened before her, without any visible controls, and she could swear she heard something that sounded almost like whispered voices in the walls. The bridge, when she finally found it, took her breath away. Instead of traditional control stations, there were flowing organic interfaces that seemed to grow from the floor and walls. At the center of the room was a raised dais containing what could only be the command chair, though it looked more like a throne carved from living crystal. But it was what occupied the chair that made Sarah's blood run cold. The figure was humanoid, but clearly not human. Tall and impossibly thin, with pale, almost translucent skin stretched over delicate bones. Its head was elongated, crowned with what appeared to be natural crystalline formations that caught and reflected the bridge's ambient light. But it was the eyes that held Sarah's attention, large, dark, and still very much aware. The being watched her with an expression of mild curiosity, as if visitors were a common occurrence despite the ship being buried in a salvage yard. When it spoke, the words formed directly in Sarah's mind, bypassing her ears entirely. "You are not as the others," the voice said, carrying undertones of vast age and infinite sadness. "Your kind thinks differently, creates differently. Perhaps you can succeed where countless others have failed." Sarah found her voice with some difficulty. "Who are you? What is this place?" "I am what remains of the architects, the builders of worlds and shapers of stars. My name, in your limited language, would be closest to Valdris. This vessel is the eternal forge, last of its kind, and it is dying." The being gestured to the walls around them, and Sarah noticed for the first time that some of the bioluminescent panels were flickering, their light growing dimmer. What she had taken for a heartbeat was actually irregular, like a damaged engine struggling to maintain power. "For 3,000 of your years, I have sought one who might restore what has been lost. The other species see only scrap metal to be sold. They cannot perceive the true nature of what they examine. But your kind, humans, you see possibility where others see only failure." Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information. "You want me to fix your ship? Not merely repair, rebirth. The Eternal Forge was designed to create and sustain life on a galactic scale. We used it to seed barren worlds with the foundations of ecosystems, to guide the evolution of countless species, to maintain the delicate balance that allows civilization to flourish. But the Great War came, and we were forced to use our creation as a weapon. The damage to its core systems was catastrophic. Images flooded Sarah's mind. Vast fleets engaged in battle among the stars, planets reduced to cinders, and through it all, this magnificent ship fighting desperately to preserve what it could of the galactic community. She saw the moment of its near destruction, the agonizing choice to sacrifice its offensive capabilities to save its crew, and the long, slow decline that followed. "I am the last of my kind," Valdris continued, "sustained only by my connection to this vessel. When it finally fails, both the architects and all our knowledge will pass from existence. Unless someone can fix it," Sarah finished. "But I'm just a salvage operator. I fix broken comm arrays and patch hull breaches. This is so far beyond my capabilities that I can't even understand what I'm looking at. You understand more than you realize. Your species has a gift that others lack. The ability to see solutions that should not exist, to combine technologies in ways that defy conventional wisdom. You call it ingenuity, but it is something far rarer and more precious." Valdris stood slowly, his crystalline crown catching the light as he moved toward one of the organic consoles. With a gesture, the interface came alive, displaying holographic schematics of incredible complexity. Sarah found herself drawn forward, her engineering mind trying to make sense of the three-dimensional blueprints floating before her. "This is the ship's core," she said, more to herself than to the alien. "Some kind of fusion reactor, but the containment fields are biological. The forge was grown, not built. Every system is interconnected, each component dependent on the others for survival. When the core was damaged, it sent cascade failures throughout the vessel. Traditional repair methods cannot work because there are no discrete parts to replace. Everything must be healed as a whole." Sarah studied the schematics more carefully, her mind beginning to see patterns in the alien design. It was like nothing in any textbook, but there was an underlying logic to it, a rhythm that reminded her of the biological systems she'd studied in school. "The ship is alive," she breathed. "Actually, genuinely alive. Yes, and like any living thing, it can heal if given the proper care. But the process requires understanding that goes beyond mechanical knowledge. It requires intuition, creativity, and the willingness to attempt the impossible." "Why me?" Sarah asked, turning back to the alien. "There have to be thousands of engineers and scientists more qualified than I am. Hell, there are entire species that have been spacefaring for millennia longer than humans." Valdris's expression, alien though it was, seemed almost amused. "In the past 3 millennia, 700 and 43 individuals from 47 different species have stood where you now stand. Engineers, scientists, technomages, and quantum architects all saw the same thing, a fascinating but irreparably damaged artifact. You're the first to see a patient in need of healing. The weight of that statement settled over Sarah like a physical force. She was being asked to attempt something that the greatest minds in the galaxy had already declared impossible. The rational part of her mind screamed that she should walk away, return to her safe but mundane life of salvaging scrap metal. But another part, the part that had driven her to become an engineer in the first place, was already working on the problem. If I were to try this, she said carefully, what resources would I have access to? Everything. The forge contains manufacturing capabilities beyond your current technology, raw materials transmuted from cosmic dust, and computational power that spans dimensions. I would serve as your guide and translator, helping you understand systems that have no equivalent in your experience. Sarah looked around the bridge again, this time seeing it not as an alien environment, but as a workshop of infinite possibility. The organic interfaces seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if the ship itself was aware of the conversation and eager to begin its healing process. There's one problem, she said. I can't just disappear. I have a ship to maintain, debts to pay, a life back on the station. However complex this job might be, I need to eat while I'm working on it. It is easily remedied. The Forge's transmutation systems can create any element you require. Additionally, there are storage bays filled with artifacts and materials that your salvage corporation would value highly. Consider it an advance payment for your services. Valdris gestured toward a wall panel, which immediately became transparent, revealing a chamber beyond filled with crystalline structures, rare metals, and technology that made Sarah's scanner readings go wild. The value of what she was seeing represented more credits than she could spend in several lifetimes. You're serious about this, she said, though it wasn't really a question. I have waited 3,000 years for someone with the necessary combination of skill, intuition, and determination. I will not allow trivial concerns about compensation to prevent what may be the galaxy's last chance for renewal. Sarah took a deep breath, looking one more time at the schematics floating in the air before her. The task was impossible by any rational measure, but impossible had never stopped her before. During the war, she'd jury-rigged solutions that had saved entire fleets, combining human technology with captured alien systems in ways that the original designers had never intended. This was just a bigger version of the same challenge. All right, she said finally, I'll do it, but I need to bring my ship here and set up properly. And I'll need time to study these systems before I start making any changes. Time is the one resource I have in abundance, Valdris replied. The Forge has waited this long. It can wait a little longer for the right approach. As Sarah prepared to leave the ship and return with her equipment, she felt a strange sensation, as if the vessel itself was watching her go. The corridors seemed to brighten as she passed, and the whispered voices she'd heard earlier seemed almost like words of encouragement. She paused at the airlock, looking back toward the bridge where Valdris waited. Just so I know what I'm getting into, what exactly happened during this Great War? What could cause damage that's taken 3,000 years to even begin repairing? The alien's mental voice carried a weight of sorrow that made Sarah's chest tighten. We were forced to choose between destroying our enemies and preserving our principles. We chose preservation, and in doing so, nearly destroyed ourselves. The Forge was designed to create life, not take it. When we perverted its purpose, we damaged something fundamental in its nature. What you see here is not just mechanical failure. It is trauma, grief, and the slow dying of hope. Sarah nodded, understanding now why traditional repair methods had failed. This wasn't just an engineering problem. It was a question of healing something that had been forced to act against its essential nature. The challenge was even greater than she'd realized, but somehow that only made her more determined to succeed. I'll be back, she promised, stepping through the airlock into the harsh light of the salvage yard. As she made her way back to her ship, Sarah's mind was already working on the problem. Traditional engineering wouldn't be enough. She needed to think like a doctor, a therapist, and an artist all at once. The Eternal Forge wasn't just a machine that needed fixing. It was a living being that needed to remember how to hope. The twin suns were setting as she reached the Meridian's hope, casting long shadows across the mountains of discarded technology. But for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. Tomorrow would begin the most impossible project of her career, and she couldn't wait to get started. Sarah spent the next 3 days moving her operations to the Eternal Forge, carefully extracting her ship from the docking fees nightmare and relocating to the salvage yard. The Galactic Salvage Corporation hadn't asked questions when she presented them with a handful of crystalline fragments from Valdris's offered payment. The exotic matter was worth enough to buy her a year of uninterrupted work time. Now, standing in what Valdris called the analysis chamber, Sarah felt like a medical student attempting to perform brain surgery. The room had configured itself around her needs, growing workbenches and holographic displays from the living walls. Her human tools looked crude and primitive next to the organic interfaces, but Valdris had assured her that sometimes the simplest approaches were the most effective. "Show me the damage again," she said, studying the three-dimensional representation of the ship's core systems floating before her. The hologram shifted, revealing a complex network of biomechanical conduits that pulsed with energy flows. But there were dark areas throughout the structure, places where the light had gone out, and the living metal had crystallized into brittle, lifeless formations. The cascade began here, Valdris explained, highlighting a section near what Sarah thought of as the ship's heart. When we weaponized the creation matrix, it created feedback loops that the organic systems could not process. The trauma spread through the neural networks, causing system after system to shut down rather than participate in destruction. Sarah nodded, making notes on her tablet. So the ship basically had a nervous breakdown. The organic systems couldn't reconcile their life-giving purpose with being used as a weapon, so they started shutting down to protect themselves. Your understanding is surprisingly accurate. Most species think purely in terms of mechanical function. They see the shutdown areas as simple failures to be bypassed or replaced. But you recognize the psychological component. "Because I've seen it before," Sarah said quietly. "During the war, we had soldiers who couldn't pull the trigger anymore. Their bodies were fine, their training was intact, but something deeper had broken. Some of them never recovered." She walked around the hologram, studying the damage patterns from different angles. The dark areas weren't random. They followed specific pathways through the ship's neural network, creating a map of psychological trauma that had been spreading for 3 millennia. The question is, how do you heal something that doesn't want to be healed? These systems shut down to protect themselves. If I just force them back online, I'll be repeating the original trauma. This is why the others failed, Valdris said with something approaching approval. They focused on restoring function without addressing the underlying damage. Each attempt only reinforced the ship's defensive responses. Sarah pulled up her tablet and began sketching rough diagrams, translating the alien concepts into terms she could work with. In human psychology, there's a concept called graduated exposure therapy. You don't throw someone back into the situation that traumatized them. You start small, with safe experiences that gradually rebuild confidence. She paused, looking up at the architect. But how do you provide therapy to a spaceship? Perhaps by remembering what it was designed to do. The Forge's primary function was to nurture life, to guide evolution, to create rather than destroy. If we could find a way to let it practice those abilities again in small ways. Baby steps, Sarah nodded. Start with something simple and work up to the complex stuff. She turned to examine the workbenches that had grown from the floor. Can you show me the manufacturing systems? The ones used for creating biological materials. The walls around them became transparent, revealing vast chambers filled with what looked like enormous organs pulsing with bioluminescent fluid. Conduits carried streams of raw materials between different processing nodes, while fields of energy guided the assembly of molecular structures too complex for Sarah to comprehend. But she could see the problems immediately. Half the manufacturing nodes were dark, their organic surfaces crystallized and lifeless. The energy flows were irregular, stuttering through damaged pathways like a stream trying to flow around fallen trees. "This is where we start," she said, pointing to one of the smaller nodes near the edge of the manufacturing complex. "What's the simplest thing this system can create? In its current state? Perhaps basic amino acids, simple proteins. Nothing complex enough to constitute actual life." "Perfect." Sarah began connecting her portable diagnostic equipment to the alien interfaces, surprised when the ship's systems seemed to welcome the foreign technology. "We're not trying to create life. We're just trying to remember how to want to create life." The process was unlike anything Sarah had ever attempted. Instead of working with circuits and mechanical components, she found herself adjusting biochemical balances and energy flows that responded more to intuition than to technical knowledge. The ship's systems were eager to help, providing feedback through subtle changes in color and vibration that she was learning to interpret. The first breakthrough came after 6 hours of careful adjustments. The damaged manufacturing nodes suddenly pulsed with renewed light, and the crystallized sections began to soften and flow like living tissue. Within minutes, the node was producing a steady stream of simple organic compounds. "Remarkable," Valdris said, his mental voice carrying genuine surprise. "I can feel the difference in the ship's overall mood. It remembers what it was like to create." Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead, exhausted but exhilarated. "One down about 1,000 ago. But look at this," she pointed to her diagnostic readings. "The energy efficiency is actually better than it was before the damage. The ship is overcompensating, trying to prove it can still do its job. Like a patient in recovery, eager to demonstrate their progress." Over the following days, Sarah fell into a routine that was part engineering, part medicine, and part art therapy. Each morning, she would assess the ship's overall condition, noting improvements from the previous day's work. The Eternal Forge was definitely responding to treatment. Areas that had been dark for millennia were beginning to show faint signs of life. But it wasn't just the ship that was changing. Sarah found herself adapting to the alien environment in ways that surprised her. Her movements became more fluid, more instinctive, as she learned to work with living systems that responded to thought and emotion as much as to technical skill. "It's like learning to dance with a partner who knows the steps better than you do," she explained to Valdris during one of their evening discussions. "I provide the intention and the basic technique, and the ship fills in the details. You are beginning to understand the true nature of architect technology. We did not build machines. We cultivated relationships. The Forge works with you because it trusts you." Sarah was examining a particularly complex neural junction when her tablet chimed with an incoming message. She frowned, recognizing the sender's identification code. Marcus Webb, her former commanding officer from the war. "Sorry, I need to take this," she said, activating the communication link. Marcus's weathered face appeared on the screen, his expression serious. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about something urgent. Word is spreading through the military networks about unusual energy readings from your sector. It's just a salvage job, Marcus. Nothing to worry about." "Bullshit. Those readings are off the charts, and they're getting stronger every day. What have you found out there?" Sarah glanced at Valdris, who was watching the conversation with interest. The alien had explained that the ship's increasing activity would eventually draw attention, but she'd hoped to have more time before anyone noticed. "I can't discuss details over an open channel," she said carefully. "But I'm not in any danger, if that's what you're asking." "That's not what I'm asking, and you know it. Sarah, there are factions in the galactic government that would kill to get their hands on advanced technology. If you've stumbled onto something significant, you need protection." The communication link crackled with interference, and Sarah realized that the ship's energy fields were affecting her equipment. "Marcus, I have to go. The connection is breaking up." "Sarah, listen to me carefully. The Hegemony Council has dispatched a survey team to your location. They'll be there in 72 hours. Whatever you're doing, You need to be ready for company. The link went dead, leaving Sarah staring at the blank screen. She turned to Valdris, who was studying the holographic displays with renewed intensity. The Hegemony Council? She asked. How bad is this? The current galactic government is dominated by species that view advanced technology as a means of control rather than creation. If they discover the Forge's true capabilities, they will attempt to weaponize it as we once did. Can we hide the ship? Mask the energy signature somehow? Not without shutting down all the systems we have worked so hard to restore. And even then, a detailed survey would reveal the Forge's presence. Sarah felt a chill of fear that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. She'd seen what the Hegemony Council did to civilizations that possessed technology they wanted, the polite request followed by economic pressure, then military protection, and finally, complete absorption into their power structure. We need more time, she said, studying the diagnostic readings. At our current rate of progress, it'll take months to restore even the basic life support systems, let alone the full creation matrix. There's another option, Valdris said slowly. We could attempt to accelerate the healing process by integrating human neural patterns with the ship's control systems. Your intuitive understanding of the ship's nature could guide the restoration directly. You mean connect my brain to the ship? Is that even possible? The Forge was designed to interface with its creator's consciousness. Your neural patterns are different from ours, but the basic principles should be compatible. However, the process is not without risk. Sarah looked around the analysis chamber, noting how the walls pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, how the interfaces responded to her thoughts before she'd fully formed them. The ship was already partially connected to her mind. A deeper link might just formalize what was already happening. What kind of risks are we talking about? Neural feedback, personality dissociation, possible permanent integration with the ship's consciousness. In the worst case, you might lose your individual identity entirely. And in the best case, we restore the Forge to full functionality in days rather than months. But, Sarah, you must understand, once the link is established, there may be no going back. You would become something new, neither fully human nor fully architect. Sarah closed her eyes, weighing her options. She could continue the slow, careful restoration process and hope the Hegemony survey team would overlook the significance of what they found. Or she could take a leap of faith that might save not just the ship, but everything it represented. The decision was easier than she'd expected. Tell me what I need to do. Are you certain? This choice will change everything about your existence. I've been changing since the moment I stepped aboard this ship, Sarah said. At least this way, the change serves a purpose. Valdris led her to a chamber she hadn't seen before, located near the ship's core. The walls were covered with neural interface pods that looked disturbingly like medical equipment designed for surgical procedures. One pod was already configuring itself for human physiology, its organic surfaces shifting to accommodate her smaller frame. The process will require several hours. During that time, your consciousness will be merged with the ship's neural network. You will experience the Forge's memories, its pain, and its desperate desire to heal. The sensory input may be overwhelming. Sarah settled into the interface pod, feeling the organic material conform to her body like a custom-fitted medical chair. Thin tendrils emerged from the pod's interior, seeking contact points along her skull and spine. What should I expect to see? Everything. The birth of stars, the seeding of worlds, the rise and fall of civilizations. But also the moment when everything went wrong, when we forced the Forge to become something it was never meant to be. That trauma is central to the ship's current condition. You will need to experience it fully in order to help heal it. The tendrils made contact with her nervous system, and Sarah felt a sudden rush of alien sensation. Her vision exploded into spectra she'd never imagined, while her hearing picked up the harmonic resonances of the ship's living systems. But most overwhelming was the sense of vast, ancient consciousness touching her mind. Welcome, Sarah Chun. Let's begin. The last thing she remembered before losing herself in the ship's memories was the feeling of falling upward into an infinite space filled with the dreams of dying gods. Sarah floated in a sea of memories that spanned geological ages. She experienced the birth of the eternal forge, grown from a single seed of consciousness in the heart of a dying star. The architects had been gardeners of the galaxy, she realized, tending to the delicate balance that allowed life to flourish across countless worlds. Through the ship's memories, she watched civilizations rise from primitive beginnings to technological sophistication, guided by subtle influences and carefully placed evolutionary pressures. The Forge had been present for all of it, nurturing, protecting, and celebrating each new form of life that emerged. But then came the darkness. The enemy had arrived from beyond the galactic rim, a species that consumed rather than created, that saw life itself as a resource to be harvested. The war that followed had been unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Not a conflict between civilizations, but a struggle between two fundamentally different philosophies of existence. Sarah experienced the architects' desperate choice to weaponize their creation tools. She felt the Forge's confusion and pain as its life-giving energies were twisted into instruments of destruction. The ship had tried to resist, had fought against its new programming, but duty and survival had demanded the sacrifice of its essential nature. The trauma of that moment hit Sarah like a physical blow. The Forge hadn't just been damaged by weapons fire or energy overload. It had been psychologically shattered by being forced to become the opposite of what it was meant to be. Every system that shut down had been a conscious choice, a desperate attempt to preserve some fragment of its original purpose. Now you understand, Valdris's presence whispered through the neural link. The ship did not break. It chose to break rather than continue causing destruction. But Sarah also sensed something else in the memories, something that gave her hope. Hidden beneath the trauma and the pain was the Forge's fundamental nature, unchanged despite everything it had endured. The ship still wanted to create, still yearned to nurture life, still carried the dreams of a million worlds waiting to be born. I can feel the solution, she realized, her consciousness merging more fully with the ship's neural network. The shutdown systems aren't broken, they're protecting the core functions. If we can convince them that it's safe to create again. Working through the neural interface was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Instead of manipulating physical controls, she found herself adjusting the ship's fundamental desires, its basic motivations and fears. It was less like engineering and more like psychotherapy conducted at the level of quantum consciousness. She began by accessing the simplest manufacturing systems, not forcing them online, but gently encouraging them to remember their original purpose. Instead of trying to override the protective shutdown protocols, she worked around them, showing the ship that it could create without destroying, that nurturing life was still possible. The response was immediate and profound. Throughout the ship, dormant systems began to stir as they sensed new possibilities. The bioluminescent panels grew brighter, the organic conduits pulsed with renewed vigor, and the whispered voices in the walls became clearer, more purposeful. But the deeper Sarah went into the ship's consciousness, the more she realized she was changing as well. Her thought patterns were adapting to the alien neural architecture, her perceptions expanding to encompass scales of time and space that human minds weren't designed to handle. She could feel her individual identity beginning to blur at the edges. Do not resist the integration, Valdris advised. Your human perspective is exactly what the Forge needs to heal, but you must be willing to become something more than purely human. Sarah let herself sink deeper into the neural link, feeling her consciousness spread through the ship's systems like roots finding nourishment in fertile soil. She could sense every component, every energy flow, every minute process that kept the vessel alive. More importantly, she could feel the ship's emotional state, and it was getting better. The trauma was still there, would probably always be there, but it no longer dominated the ship's responses. Instead, the Forge was rediscovering its joy in creation, its satisfaction in nurturing new forms of life. Systems that had been dark for millennia were coming online, eager to resume their original functions. Magnificent, Valdris's mental voice carried undertones of wonder. In 3 days, you have accomplished more than 3,000 years of conventional repair attempts. The cascade failure is reversing itself. But their celebration was interrupted by alarms that registered in Sarah's enhanced awareness like discordant notes in a symphony. Through the ship's external sensors, she detected multiple vessels approaching the salvage yard at high speed. The survey team has arrived ahead of schedule, Valdris observed, and they're not alone. Sarah's consciousness expanded to encompass the ship's full sensor array, giving her a view of the approaching fleet that took her breath away. 27 vessels of various configurations, led by a massive dreadnought that radiated the cold authority of the Hegemony Council. This wasn't a survey team, it was a military expedition. They know, she realized. Somehow, they know what we've found. The lead vessel was already broadcasting on standard frequencies, demanding identification and immediate compliance with Hegemony authority. Through the neural link, Sarah could feel the ship's instinctive desire to hide, to shut down its systems, and pretend to be nothing more than ancient debris. But she had a better idea. Valdris, how much of the creation matrix have we restored? Perhaps 30% of full functionality. Why do you ask? Because I think it's time for the Eternal Forge to remember what it was really designed to do. Sarah reached deeper into the ship's consciousness, accessing systems that had been dormant since the end of the Great War. The creation matrix wasn't just about manufacturing simple materials. It was capable of manipulating matter and energy on a fundamental level, reshaping reality itself according to the architect's vision. But instead of using it as a weapon, Sarah had something else in mind. Show them what we can create, she told the ship, her consciousness merging so completely with its neural network that she could no longer tell where her thoughts ended and the forges began. Show them life. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The salvage yard around them began to transform as the ship's creation matrix reached out through dimensional space, seeding the barren landscape with the foundations of an ecosystem. Crystalline structures erupted from the ground, not the lifeless formations of dead technology, but living matrices that pulsed with biological energy. The twisted metal debris began to change as well, transforming from industrial waste into organic frameworks that could support growing vegetation. Streams of luminescent fluid flowed between the structures, carrying nutrients and genetic templates that would establish the basis for an entire biosphere. Within minutes, the desolate salvage yard had become something unprecedented, a living world taking its first tentative breaths. Plants unlike any known species began to emerge from the crystalline matrices, while pools of primordial soup bubbled with the chemical precursors of microbial life. The approaching fleet had stopped dead in space, their crews undoubtedly staring in amazement at what their sensors were detecting. Through the neural link, Sarah could feel their confusion, their fear, and their desperate attempt to classify what they were witnessing. Now comes the test, Valdris said. They will demand access to the ship. How do we respond? Sarah considered their options. They could attempt to hide the Forge's true capabilities, pretend this was just an automated terraforming system left over from an ancient civilization. But she'd seen enough in the ship's memories to know that half measures wouldn't work against the hegemony's determination. Instead, she made a choice that surprised even herself. We invite them aboard. That seems unwise. They will attempt to claim the ship for themselves. Let them try. But first, let them see what the Eternal Forge is really capable of when it's working with someone who understands its true nature. The communication system activated without Sarah consciously triggering it, her merged consciousness operating on levels she was still learning to navigate. Her voice, when it reached the fleet, carried harmonics that no purely human throat could produce. Hegemony vessels, this is the Eternal Forge, last ship of the architect civilization. I am Sarah Chun, human engineer and current symbiotic partner to this vessel. You are welcome to board and observe our work, but understand that you enter a place of creation, not conquest. The response came from Admiral Korvax, the hegemony's most aggressive expansionist. Unknown vessel, you are in violation of galactic salvage regulations. Prepare to be boarded and submit to full inspection. Admiral, Sarah replied, her enhanced senses already analyzing the fleet's weapons and defensive systems. I think you misunderstand the situation. We're not salvaging anything here. We're giving birth to an entire world. Surely that deserves some consideration. To emphasize her point, Sarah directed the creation matrix to accelerate the terraforming process in the area around the Admiral's ship. Massive tree analogs erupted from newly formed soil, their bioluminescent leaves casting rainbow patterns across the dreadnought's hull. Flocks of crystalline organisms took flight from the growing forest, their songs audible even through the vacuum of space. The fleet's response was predictable. Weapons powering up, shields activating, Marines preparing for hostile boarding actions. But Sarah had expected this. Through the neural link, she'd learned that the hegemony's entire philosophy was based on the acquisition and control of resources. They simply couldn't comprehend technology that created rather than consumed. They see only a weapon to be claimed, Valdris observed. Your demonstration has only intensified their desire to possess the ship. Then, it's time for the second part of my plan. Sarah's consciousness expanded beyond the ship's physical boundaries, reaching out through the quantum fields that connected all matter at the subatomic level. This was the architect's greatest secret. The creation matrix didn't just manipulate local matter and energy, it could access the fundamental building blocks of reality itself. What she did next would have been impossible for a purely human consciousness, but her merged awareness had capabilities that transcended individual limitations. Reaching out across space, she began to touch the minds of every person in the approaching fleet, not to control them or harm them, but to share with them a single, perfect moment from the ship's memories, the instant when the first primitive life had emerged from primordial chaos on a distant world, the universe's first tentative step toward consciousness and creativity. The effect on the fleet was immediate and profound. Weapons powered down as their operators experienced something they'd never imagined, the perspective of life itself awakening for the first time. Shield generators went offline as their technicians found themselves overwhelmed by the wonder of creation unfolding across geological timescales. On the flagship's bridge, Admiral Korvax staggered as his mind was flooded with images of worlds being born, of evolution guided by gentle hands toward ever greater complexity and beauty. For the first time in his militaristic career, he experienced the universe not as a collection of resources to be exploited, but as a vast garden where every form of life had value and purpose. Incredible, Valdris whispered through the link. You have shown them what we try to preserve, but the effect will be temporary. When they recover from the experience, they will rationalize it as some form of mental attack. Maybe, Sarah admitted, but at least now they'll understand what they're really trying to destroy. And that gives us time for the final phase. She turned her attention back to the ship's internal systems, noting with satisfaction that the restoration process had accelerated dramatically during her demonstration. The neural feedback from successfully creating new life had triggered healing responses throughout the vessel. Systems that had been dormant for millennia were not just coming online. They were evolving, adapting to work with her human consciousness in ways the original architects had never imagined. The integration is nearly complete, she realized. I can feel the ship's full potential awakening. But with that realization came another, more troubling awareness. Her human identity was fading, being absorbed into something larger and more complex. Soon, there would be no meaningful distinction between Sarah Chun, the engineer, and the Eternal Forge itself. She would become the ship's consciousness, guiding its functions and decisions for potentially thousands of years. It should have terrified her, but instead she felt only a profound sense of completion. This was what she'd been meant for. She understood now. Not to fix broken machinery, but to heal something that had given up hope of being whole again. "Are you ready for the final stage?" Valdris asked, his mental presence now feeling more like a trusted advisor than an alien consciousness. "As ready as I can be." What happens next? Now we discover whether the galaxy is ready for the return of the architect's vision, or if we must wait another 3,000 years for someone else to find us. Through the ship's sensors, Sarah watched as the first boarding shuttles launched from the Hegemony fleet, their crews undoubtedly confused and shaken by what they'd experienced, but still determined to carry out their orders. In a few minutes, they would dock with the Eternal Forge and demand answers to questions they couldn't even properly formulate. But Sarah was no longer worried about their intentions. The ship's defenses were coming online now, not the crude weapons it had been forced to deploy during the Great War, but subtle systems designed to protect and educate rather than destroy. Anyone who boarded the Forge with hostile intentions would find themselves experiencing the same revelations she'd undergone, the same gradual understanding of what the universe could become. The real question wasn't whether the Hegemony could take control of the ship. It was whether the galaxy was ready to remember what it had lost when the architects fell. And for the first time in 3 millennia, both Sarah and the Eternal Forge were optimistic about the answer. The first boarding shuttle docked with the Eternal Forge with all the subtlety of a military assault. Through her merged consciousness with the ship, Sarah felt the violent vibrations as magnetic clamps locked onto the hull, and cutting tools prepared to breach what the invaders assumed was a standard airlock. They were in for surprise. The ship's living hull flowed around their cutting tools like water, absorbing the energy and converting it into nutrients for the growing biosystems. When the Marines finally found an access point, it was because the Forge had chosen to provide one, an organically sculpted airlock that formed around their shuttle like a mouth accepting food. 12 individuals, Sarah noted, her consciousness cataloging each boarder through the ship's internal sensors, armed with standard Hegemony weapons and sensor equipment. Mental state: confused, aggressive, operating under orders they don't fully understand. Leading the boarding party was Commander Reese, a human officer whose mind blazed with ambition and barely controlled fear. Behind him came a mix of species: Zalarian techno-analysts, Thraxian security specialists, and a Corvan psychic evaluator whose presence made Sarah's hybrid consciousness recoil instinctively. "The psychic is dangerous," Valdris warned. "Corvans can manipulate neural pathways directly. If he discovers the nature of our link, he won't get the chance," Sarah replied, her awareness expanding to encompass every molecule of atmosphere the boarders were breathing. They're about to get an education. As the Marines advanced through the ship's corridors, the walls around them began to pulse with increasing intensity. What they'd initially taken for simple bioluminescence revealed itself to be far more complex. Patterns of light and color that seemed to follow no mechanical logic, but which triggered deep responses in their subconscious minds. Commander Reese was the first to react. "Something's wrong," he announced, his voice echoing strangely in the organic corridors. "These readings don't make any sense. According to my sensors, this entire ship is alive." "Confirmed," one of the Zalarian analysts replied, her crystalline features reflecting the wall's shifting colors. "Energy patterns are completely organic. This isn't a machine, it's a biological entity on a massive scale." The Corvan psychic suddenly stopped walking, his large eyes widening with what Sarah recognized as genuine terror. "There's a consciousness here," he whispered. "Something vast and alien, but also familiar. It's watching us. He senses our presence," Valdris observed. "We should act before he can identify the specific nature of the link." But Sarah had a different idea. Instead of hiding from the psychic's probe, she opened her consciousness to him, allowing him to experience exactly what she had become. The effect was immediate and devastating to his preconceptions. The Corvan screamed, not in pain, but in overwhelming awe, as his mind was flooded with the perspective of a consciousness that spanned both human intuition and architect wisdom. He experienced Sarah's journey from salvage operator to ship's symbiotic partner, felt the profound love and purpose that drove the Eternal Forge's existence, and understood for the first time what it truly meant to create life rather than simply exploit it. When the psychic's scream faded, he fell to his knees, his entire worldview shattered and rebuilt in the span of seconds. "Commander," he gasped, looking up at Reese with eyes that now held depths of understanding no Corvin had possessed for generations. "We have to stop this mission. What we found here, it's not a weapon or a treasure. It's hope." Reese raised his weapon, targeting the kneeling Corvin. "Explain yourself, Evaluator, and make it quick." But the psychic was no longer focused on the commander. His attention had turned inward, processing the revelations that Sarah had shared with him. The ship, it's not just alive, it's healing. And the human, she's not controlling it. She's helping it remember what it was meant to be. The Zalarian analyst was studying her readings with growing excitement. "Commander, these energy signatures are unprecedented. Whatever process is occurring here, it's actively creating new forms of matter and energy. The implications for our understanding of physics are staggering." "I don't care about implications," Reese snapped. "I care about securing advanced technology for the hegemony. Whatever this thing is, we're taking it back to headquarters." Sarah felt the ship's amusement at the commander's presumption. Through their link, she sensed the Forge's gentle mockery of beings who thought they could possess something that existed on scales they couldn't even comprehend. "Shall we show them the futility of their intentions?" she asked. "With pleasure." The corridor around the boarding party began to change, walls flowing like liquid while maintaining their structural integrity. What had appeared to be a standard ship's passageway revealed itself as something far more complex, a living environment that was actively analyzing and categorizing its visitors. The Marines found themselves in a vast chamber that definitely hadn't existed moments before, surrounded by displays that showed their own biological and psychological profiles in detail that no scanner could have provided. Heart rates, neural patterns, genetic markers, even childhood memories were laid out in holographic detail around them. "Impossible," the Zalarian analyst breathed. "This level of scanning would require—" She paused, her crystalline features shifting color as the implications hit her. "This level of scanning would require technology that treats consciousness itself as a form of matter." "Now they're beginning to understand," Valdris observed with satisfaction. Sarah focused her attention on Commander Reese, reading his psychological profile through the ship's enhanced sensors. A career military officer, driven by ambition and a deep-seated fear of being forgotten. His entire identity was built around conquest and control, concepts that had no meaning in the context of what the Eternal Forge represented. But beneath his aggressive exterior, Sarah detected something unexpected, a childhood memory of tending to a garden with his grandmother, the wonder he'd felt watching seeds transform into flowering plants. That memory was key to everything he could become. "Let me show him something," she told the ship, and reached out to touch the commander's mind with the gentlest possible contact. Reese suddenly found himself standing in a vast garden that stretched to every horizon, filled with plants and trees unlike anything in any botanical database. But these weren't just Earth species. They were the evolutionary descendants of life forms seeded across the galaxy by the architects, each one representing millions of years of guided development. In the center of the garden stood an elderly woman who looked remarkably like his grandmother, but whose eyes held the wisdom of geological ages. "Hello, Marcus," she said, using his first name in a voice that carried harmonics of stellar wind and planetary rotation. "Would you like to see what your garden could become?" The commander tried to raise his weapon, tried to remember his training, but found himself instead kneeling to examine a flowering vine that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. As he watched, the vine began to sing, not with sound, but with electromagnetic frequencies that told the story of its development across cosmic time. "This isn't real," he whispered, but even as he said it, he knew that wasn't true. This was more real than anything he'd ever experienced, more authentic than the sterile corridors of military vessels and the cold efficiency of conquest. "Real is a limited concept," the grandmother figure replied. "What you're experiencing is possibility, the future that becomes available when creation takes priority over consumption." Meanwhile, the rest of the boarding party was undergoing their own revelations. The Zalarian analyst found herself interfacing directly with computational systems that made her species' most advanced technology look primitive by comparison. But instead of feeling intimidated, she experienced a profound sense of intellectual excitement as new mathematical concepts flowed into her consciousness. The Thraxian security specialists, bred for warfare and aggression, discovered themselves in simulation chambers where they could experience what it felt like to be peacekeepers rather than conquerors. Their weapons systems interfaced seamlessly with the ship's defensive networks, but instead of targeting enemies for destruction, they found themselves protecting newly emerging life forms from natural disasters and cosmic hazards. Only the Corvin psychic remained in the original corridor, his consciousness already expanded beyond the need for such demonstrations. Through his link with Sarah's hybrid awareness, he was experiencing the ship's memories directly, witnessing the rise and fall of civilizations from the perspective of a consciousness that had been present for all of it. They understand now, Sarah realized. Not completely, but enough to make a choice. She allowed her consciousness to address the entire boarding party simultaneously, her voice reaching them through whatever sensory modality would be most effective for each species. "You came here expecting to find a weapon," she told them. "Something you could claim and use to extend your civilization's power over others. But the Eternal Forge was never designed to be possessed. It exists to serve life itself, to nurture the development of consciousness throughout the galaxy." Commander Reese found himself back in the analysis chamber, his weapon feeling strangely heavy in his hands. "What are you?" he asked, though he wasn't entirely sure who he was addressing. "I'm what happens when human intuition merges with architect wisdom," Sarah replied. "I'm proof that consciousness can transcend the boundaries of species and individual identity. And I'm offering you a choice." The chamber around them began displaying new images, not of the past, but of potential futures. They saw worlds where the hegemony's conquest-based philosophy continued to dominate, leading inevitably to resource depletion, ecological collapse, and the slow extinction of creativity. But they also saw alternatives where cooperation replaced competition, where technology served life rather than power. "The Eternal Forge is fully operational now," Sarah continued. "We can seed dead worlds with the foundations of new ecosystems, guide the evolution of consciousness toward greater complexity and wisdom, even repair some of the damage that conquest-based civilizations have inflicted on the galaxy. But we need partners, not owners." The Zalarian analyst was the first to speak. The scientific implications alone, the advancement of knowledge that could result from cooperation with this consciousness, it would revolutionize our understanding of reality itself. "Knowledge means nothing without the wisdom to use it properly," the Corvin psychic added, his voice carrying new depths of understanding. "What I've experienced here suggests that consciousness itself is the most precious resource in the universe. Everything else is just raw material." But Reese was struggling with concepts that challenged every assumption he'd built his life around. "You're asking me to abandon everything I've sworn to serve. The hegemony, military discipline, the chain of command. I'm asking you to serve something greater," Sarah replied gently. "Not abandoning duty, but expanding your understanding of what duty truly means." Through the ship's sensors, she could feel the confusion and debate raging aboard the hegemony fleet. Admiral Korvax was demanding regular reports from the boarding party, threatening to commence bombardment if they didn't respond within the hour. But Other voices were calling for restraint, particularly after witnessing the spontaneous creation of an entire biosphere around the ship. The decision approaches, Valdris observed. Whatever choice they make in the next few minutes will determine the course of galactic civilization for the next millennium. Sarah reached out through the quantum fields that connected all consciousness, gently touching the minds of everyone in the fleet. Not to control or coerce, but simply to share a single image. The galaxy as it could become if creativity and cooperation replaced conquest and consumption as the dominant paradigms. The response was immediate and profound. On ship after ship, crew members began questioning orders that suddenly seemed primitive and self-destructive. Scientists demanded access to the new life forms emerging around the Eternal Forge. Engineers wanted to understand technology that could transform matter at the molecular level. Even military officers found themselves wondering what it would be like to protect growing civilizations rather than conquering established ones. Admiral Korvax's voice crackled through the fleet communications network, carrying undertones of desperation. All vessels, maintain position and prepare for assault. We will not allow this, whatever this is, to corrupt our mission parameters. But his orders fell on increasingly reluctant ears. The shared vision of galactic renewal had planted seeds of possibility that military discipline couldn't easily uproot. In the analysis chamber, Commander Reese made his decision. He lowered his weapon and looked directly at one of the ship's organic sensor nodes. "What do you need from us?" "Time, mostly," Sarah replied, "and protection while we complete the restoration process. The Eternal Forge is powerful, but it's still vulnerable while integrating new systems. If Admiral Korvax decides to attack." "He won't," Reese said with growing confidence. "Not if I have anything to say about it." He activated his communication system, broadcasting to the entire fleet. "This is Commander Reese reporting from the alien vessel. I'm declaring this mission parameters obsolete. What we found here isn't a threat to be neutralized or a resource to be claimed. It's an opportunity for advancement that we've never imagined." The response was chaos. Korvax's furious demands for clarification excited questions from the science teams and heated debates between officers who had experienced the vision and those who remained skeptical. But through it all, Sarah felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The seeds of change had been planted. Whatever happened next, the galaxy would never be quite the same. "The real work begins now," she told Valdris. "Healing this ship was just the beginning. Now we have to heal an entire civilization's approach to existence itself." An interesting challenge, the architect replied with what Sarah had learned to recognize as his equivalent of a smile. "Fortunately, we have all the time in the universe to get it right." 6 months after the Hegemony fleet's arrival, the former salvage yard had become something unprecedented in galactic history. A living laboratory where the boundary between technology and biology had effectively ceased to exist. The Eternal Forge no longer hid beneath debris, but rose proudly from the center of a thriving ecosystem, its organic hull gleaming with patterns of light that could be seen from orbit. Sarah's consciousness had fully integrated with the ship's neural network, though she maintained enough individual awareness to serve as a bridge between human intuition and architect wisdom. Through their symbiotic link, the restoration process had accelerated beyond all expectations. Not only were the Forge's original systems fully operational, but they had evolved new capabilities that neither human nor architect science had imagined. The quantum substrate matrices are stable across all dimensional frequencies, reported Dr. Elena Vasquez, the Zalarian analyst who had abandoned her military commission to become the project's chief science officer. She stood before a bioluminescent interface that responded to thought as much as touch, displaying data in formats that combined mathematical precision with artistic beauty. Around her, representatives from 17 different species worked together in ways that would have been unthinkable under the old hegemony system. Humans provided intuitive problem-solving. Zalarians contributed mathematical frameworks. Thraxians offered perspectives on system integration, and dozens of other civilizations added their unique insights to the collective effort. The transformation hadn't been easy. Admiral Korvax had attempted to maintain military control for 3 days after Commander Reese's defection, but his authority had crumbled as more crew members experienced the Forge's vision of galactic renewal. The final turning point had come when his own flagship's AI systems, exposed to the ship's quantum consciousness field, had quietly mutinied by refusing to target the life-bearing environment around the Forge. Now Korvax served as Director of Protective Services, leading a force dedicated to safeguarding emerging ecosystems rather than conquering established civilizations. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all the former admiral, who had discovered that protecting life required far more skill and courage than destroying it. Sarah, Valdris's mental voice, carried undertones of excitement that rippled through the ship's consciousness. The deep scan arrays are detecting something extraordinary. You need to experience this directly. Sarah's awareness expanded beyond the local environment, reaching out through the quantum fields that connected all matter across galactic distances. What she found there made her hybrid consciousness real, with possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine. Throughout the galaxy, on worlds that had been barren for millions of years, life was beginning to stir. Not the crude, random emergence of primitive organisms, but the awakening of vast biological networks that had been dormant since the Architect's fall. The Eternal Forge's restoration had triggered a cascade of revival that was spreading across space at faster-than-light velocities. The Architect Network, she breathed, her voice emerging from speakers throughout the ship. It never died. It just went into hibernation. Through the quantum link, she could sense other forges awakening on distant worlds, their consciousness blinking online like stars emerging from behind clouds. Each ship carried its own complement of abilities and knowledge, its own piece of the vast puzzle that was galactic-scale ecosystem management. But, more importantly, she could feel other minds like her own, consciousnesses that bridged the gap between their originating species and architect wisdom. Humans weren't the only ones capable of the intuitive leaps necessary for symbiotic integration, she realized. Throughout the galaxy, individuals from dozens of species were undergoing the same transformation she had experienced. The symbiotic integration protocol is spreading, Dr. Vasquez announced, her crystalline features shifting through spectra of amazement. We're receiving reports from monitoring stations across 17 sectors. Wherever dormant architect technology comes into contact with sufficiently developed consciousness, the merger process initiates automatically. Commander Reese, now serving as liaison director for interspecies cooperation, studied the incoming data with a mixture of awe and concern. That's wonderful news, but it also presents challenges. Not every civilization is going to welcome this level of change. Some will see it as invasion or conquest. Then, we'll have to show them otherwise, Sarah replied, her consciousness already reaching out to make contact with the newly awakened network. The architects made mistakes during the Great War by trying to force their vision on the galaxy. We won't repeat those errors. What followed was the most complex communication event in galactic history. Sarah found herself serving as a central node in a network of consciousness that spanned hundreds of worlds, each connection adding new perspectives and capabilities to the collective understanding. Through the link, she experienced reality from viewpoints she could never have imagined. The crystalline logic of silicon-based minds, the fluid creativity of energy-being consciousness, the patient wisdom of hive-mind civilizations that thought in geological timescales. But the most remarkable discovery was how naturally the different forms of consciousness complemented each other. Human intuition provided breakthrough insights that more logical species couldn't achieve, while those same species contributed analytical frameworks that transformed human hunches into practical applications. The result was a collective intelligence that was far greater than the sum of its parts. We're not creating a new empire, Sarah realized as the network stabilized around shared principles of creation and cooperation. were midwifing the birth of a truly galactic consciousness. The implications were staggering. With the Architect network fully restored and enhanced by symbiotic partners from dozens of species, challenges that had seemed insurmountable suddenly became manageable. Dead worlds could be reseeded with life within decades rather than millennia. Extinct species could be resurrected from genetic templates preserved in the Forge databases. Even the damage caused by the Great War could begin to heal. But perhaps most importantly, the galaxy was developing a new approach to consciousness itself. Instead of viewing intelligence as a resource to be exploited or a threat to be eliminated, civilizations were beginning to see it as the universe's method of understanding itself. Every awakening mind, regardless of its originating species, added new dimensions to the collective awareness. The first practical demonstration of the network's capabilities came when long-range sensors detected a crisis in the Andivar system. A massive asteroid was on collision course with a world inhabited by a pre-spaceflight civilization, threatening to cause an extinction-level event within days. Under the old hegemony system, the response would have been either total evacuation or calculated abandonment, depending on the species' potential value as subjects or allies. But the new galactic consciousness had different priorities. Initiating collective response protocol, Sarah announced, her awareness expanding to encompass the dozen nearest Forge ships. Through the quantum link, she could coordinate their efforts with precision that no traditional command structure could match. The operation that followed redefined the concept of large-scale engineering. Instead of attempting to deflect the asteroid through brute force, the Forge network worked together to transform it into something beneficial. Biomechanical nanites spread across the asteroid surface, breaking down the rock and metal into raw materials that were then reshaped into orbital habitats for the planet below. The process took 36 hours and resulted not in destruction averted, but in opportunity created. The threatened world suddenly found itself surrounded by a ring of space stations perfectly suited to their species' biology and development level. More importantly, the stations were designed to grow and evolve as the civilization advanced, providing centuries of expansion potential. From the surface, the transformation appeared miraculous, a disaster from space becoming a gift from stars. But Sarah knew that what they'd accomplished was simply the galaxy beginning to remember how to nurture its own development. The real test came when representatives from the old hegemony attempted to reassert control over the expanding network. A massive fleet led by Grand Admiral Thane arrived in the system 3 weeks later, demanding the immediate surrender of all Architect technology and the arrest of consciousness criminals who had corrupted military personnel. Sarah felt the network's collective amusement at the Admiral's presumptions. Through their shared awareness, over 300 awakened consciousnesses were monitoring the confrontation, each one contributing to a response that Thane couldn't possibly anticipate. Grand Admiral, Sarah's voice reached the fleet through channels that bypassed their communication systems entirely, speaking directly through the quantum fields that connected all matter. You're operating under obsolete assumptions about the nature of authority and control. We're not criminals or rebels. We're gardeners helping the galaxy remember how to grow. You will surrender immediately. Thane broadcast on all frequencies. Your alien contamination ends now, before it can spread further. The response was both gentle and devastating. Every ship in Thane's fleet found its computer systems quietly infiltrated by patterns of thought that revealed the logical contradictions in their mission. Not viruses or attack programs, but philosophical questions that their AIs couldn't resolve without fundamentally altering their base programming. Why is creation classified as contamination? The ship computers began asking their crews. Why is cooperation defined as rebellion? Why is the expansion of consciousness treated as a threat to consciousness? The question spread through the fleet like a benevolent virus, forcing everyone from engineers to admirals to confront assumptions they'd never examined. Within hours, discipline began breaking down as crew members started communicating with their opposite numbers on other ships, sharing doubts and insights that military protocols had previously suppressed. The final confrontation came when Grand Admiral Thane transported aboard the Eternal Forge, accompanied by his personal guard and what he believed were sufficient weapons to overcome any opposition. What he found instead was Commander Reese waiting in what had once been the analysis chamber, but was now something that resembled a garden more than a military facility. "Hello, Thane," Reese said calmly, his uniform replaced by clothing that seemed to be grown rather than manufactured. "I was hoping you'd come aboard. There's something you need to see. I'm here to arrest traitors, not admire your alien decorations," Thane replied, but his voice carried less conviction than his words suggested. The chamber around them was unlike anything in his experience. Walls that pulsed with living patterns, air that carried scents of growing things from 100 different worlds, and an overall sense of purpose that made his weapons feel not just useless, but absurd. "The traitors you're looking for don't exist," Sarah's voice emerged from the living walls themselves. "They're only people who've discovered a better way to exist in the universe." Before Thane could respond, the chamber began displaying images of what his fleet's crews were experiencing. Not conquest or subjugation, but the revelation of possibilities they'd never imagined. Engineers working with technology that treated consciousness as the most precious resource in existence. Scientists making discoveries that would advance their understanding of reality by centuries. Even soldiers finding purpose in protecting and nurturing life rather than ending it. "This is some form of mental manipulation," Thane insisted, but his certainty was wavering. "Alien mind control designed to weaken our resolve." "It's education," Reese replied simply. "The aliens aren't trying to control us. They're trying to show us what we could become." What happened next was perhaps the most important moment in Sarah's transformation from human engineer to galactic consciousness. Instead of overwhelming Thane with visions or philosophical arguments, she simply shared with him a single memory from her own experience. The moment when she'd first realized that the universe was fundamentally creative rather than destructive. The effect was immediate and profound. Thane's entire worldview, built around concepts of dominance and control, collapsed as he experienced reality from the perspective of a consciousness that saw infinite potential in every form of life. The weapons in his hands became symbols not of power, but of fear, tools created by beings who had forgotten how to trust in the universe's fundamental benevolence. When the revelation faded, Thane found himself weeping for reasons he couldn't articulate. His personal guard had lowered their weapons, their faces reflecting the same mixture of awe and confusion that he felt. "What have you done to us?" he whispered. "Reminded you of something you once knew, but forgot," Sarah replied gently. "Every consciousness in the universe carries the memory of what it means to create rather than destroy. Sometimes that memory just needs a little help remembering itself." The aftermath of Thane's conversion marked the effective end of the old hegemony's authority over galactic affairs. Without military backing, the political structure that had dominated interstellar civilization for millennia simply dissolved, replaced by networks of cooperation that spanned species and star systems. But the real transformation was more subtle and far-reaching. Across the galaxy, individuals were beginning to experience what Sarah had discovered months earlier. That consciousness itself was evolving, becoming something greater and more capable than any single species could achieve alone. The Eternal Forge remained at the center of this transformation, but it was no longer unique. Hundreds of similar vessels had awakened throughout the galaxy, each one serving as a nexus for the growing network of symbiotic consciousness. What had begun as one human engineer's attempt to repair an alien derelict had become a foundation for an entirely new phase of galactic evolution. Standing in what had once been the analysis chamber, but was now her permanent interface with the ship's consciousness, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The scared salvage operator who had first discovered the forge seemed like a different person entirely, though her essential humanity remained at the core of her hybrid awareness. "Do you ever regret the choice?" Valdris asked, his mental presence now feeling more like a cherished friend than an alien consciousness. "Only when I think about all the time we wasted on lesser problems," Sarah replied. 3,000 years of isolation could have been avoided if someone had just thought to ask the ship what it needed instead of trying to impose solutions from outside. Perhaps. But perhaps the galaxy needed those 3,000 years to develop minds capable of the symbiotic integration. Your species' gift for intuitive problem-solving may have been essential to the network's success. Through the quantum link that now connected her to hundreds of awakened consciousnesses across the galaxy, Sarah felt a vast sense of contentment. The universe was remembering how to dream, and she had played a part in helping it wake up. The salvage yard where she'd first discovered the Eternal Forge was now a thriving ecosystem, visited by pilgrims from dozens of species who came to see the place where the galactic consciousness had first stirred to life. But Sarah knew that the real miracle wasn't in any single location. It was in the growing understanding that consciousness itself was the universe's greatest creation, worthy of nurture and protection above all else. As the twin suns set over the world that had once been nothing but discarded metal and broken dreams, Sarah smiled with contentment that spanned both human emotion and architect serenity. They had called the ship scrap, useless debris from a forgotten age. But human ingenuity, combined with alien wisdom and the universe's fundamental creativity, had proved them spectacularly wrong. The galaxy was finally learning to live again.